What if The Hateful Eight starred Django? Well, it almost did, as the movie was originally written as a sequel to Django Unchained. Not only that, but the ending, Chapter 5, was originally completely different, as the film would have ended in a violent shootout a la Reservoir Dogs, and also starred Jennifer Lawrence as Daisy Domergue. So how do we go from that to the movie we know? To find out, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been The Hateful Eight. While Marvel has the MCU, Tarantino has a cinematic universe all his own. Across his films, certain details keep popping up, like fictional brands Red Apple cigarettes and Big Kahuna Burger, or even the fact that Pulp Fiction's Vincent Vega and Reservoir Dogs' Mr. Blonde Vic Vega are brothers, suggesting Tarantino's stories exist in the same world. In fact, Tarantino has even taken this one step further, dividing his work into two universes: the realer-than-real universe, where most of his stories are told, and the movie universe, which is made up of the over-the-top movies the characters from the realer-than-real universe go see, like Kill Bill and From Dusk Till Dawn. But for all the overlap and Easter eggs, Tarantino had never made a direct sequel to one of his movies until Django. Not only that, Tarantino's scripts are famous for their novel-like detail, page after page of character backstory and description that often never makes it to the screen. Yet for all of his talent with the pen, he had never actually written a novel, so he decided to kill two birds with one stone, write a sequel to Django Unchained in the form of a novel. Titled Django in White Hell, Tarantino was angry and depressed due to issues in his personal life at the time, a state he had never been in when writing before. As a result, he drew inspiration from classic 1960s Western shows like Bonanza, The Virginian, and The High Chaparral, which often featured episodes where outlaws, played by famous guest stars, would storm into town and hold the main characters hostage. In fact, Tarantino would use this trope again in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when Rick Dalton guest stars on Lancer and holds the little girl hostage. For Tarantino, he loved that over the course of these episodes, audiences would learn whether these strangers were truly villains or men with complicated pasts, and began wondering what would happen if a story focused entirely on those kinds of characters. No traditional heroes, just a room full of dangerous figures, each armed with a gun and an untrustworthy backstory, trapped together while a blizzard raged outside. That idea became the foundation for the sequel to Django. However, Tarantino would only write the first part of the film featuring the stagecoach before he realized it wasn't working. At the time, there was no Major Warren, who would eventually be played by Sam Jackson. That character was instead Django. As he wrote and got to Minnie's haberdashery and started to brainstorm who these other villains would be, he realized that Django didn't work in the movie because the audience would trust him, and Tarantino felt it would have spoiled the whodunit nature of the story, undermining the mystery. The story needed a room with no moral anchor, just liars, killers, and schemers, where every backstory was suspect and no one could be trusted. With Django in the mix, that balance was broken. As a result, Tarantino replaced Django with a new character, Major Warren. Still, a nod to Django survived. His saddle can be spotted resting on the pile of corpses in the film's opening. However, the road to The Hateful Eight almost ended before it began, when the script was leaked online. Tarantino had only shared it with 6 people, including 3 actors he had previously worked with: Michael Madsen, Bruce Dern, and Tim Roth. Tarantino believes that either Madsen or Dern then passed the script on to their agent, and that agent passed it on to everyone in Hollywood. The situation escalated when Gawker Media posted the script to their website. Instead of merely publishing a news story reporting that the script may have been circulating online without Tarantino's permission, Gawker promoted itself as the first source to be able to read the entire screenplay illegally, with a headline boasting, "Here is the leaked Quentin Tarantino Hateful Eight script." As a result, Tarantino, furious, would sue Gawker and scrap plans to make the movie, instead declaring that he would publish it as a book instead. Tarantino would eventually do a live table reading of the script before revealing that he planned to make it as his next film, but with a totally new ending. So what would the original ending have been like? Rather than Daisy trying to persuade Mannix to switch sides and align with her against Major Warren, the original script climaxed in a chaotic spray of bullets. Jody, hidden beneath the floorboards, would have unloaded on Major Warren until he collapsed to the ground. Mannix and Jody would then exchange fire, ending with Jody's death, but not before Daisy took her chance to finish off Warren. As Daisy turned her gun on Mannix, he managed to shoot her first, leaving himself gravely wounded in the process. The story would have closed not with Warren and Mannix reading the Lincoln letter, but with Mannix crawling into bed to wait for death, while Tim Roth's Mowbray writhed in pain on the floor, clutching his stomach and screaming as a nod to his character doing the same in Reservoir Dogs. However, when Tarantino decided to go forward with shooting the film, he announced that the ending needed some work, and the entire 5th chapter would be changed as it felt hollow, since it was just chaotic violence with little reflection. The new ending, however, not only increased the tension, but also reframed the film as more than just a bloody chamber piece. It allowed the racial and political undercurrents to surface in a meaningful way. Instead of tempting Mannix solely with cash, smash, Daisy unleashes a racist tirade meant to drive a wedge between him and Warren, painting Warren as inherently untrustworthy. The brilliance of this move is that Daisy's attack forces Mannix to confront the very heart of the film's tension. Can Warren be trusted? And if not, is that trust based on his actions or the color of his skin? Every other character in the film has proven themselves to be liars and opportunists, but Daisy implies that Warren's only real crime is his race. This is where the forged Lincoln letter, an invention Tarantino had seeded earlier, becomes essential. In the original ending, it's never brought back, but in the finished film, it takes center stage. Mannix reads the letter aloud after Daisy's execution, admiring Warren's flowery additions about Mary Todd Lincoln. Warren says early in the film that he forged the letter because a black fella is only safe around white folk when they're disarmed, and that Lincoln letter helped gain their trust. By ending with Mannix reading the full letter aloud before crumpling it up and throwing it away, it shows that Warren gained his trust through his actions, and he didn't need the letter to do that. The original ending never reached this level of resonance, but the final version transforms the climax into a meditation on race, trust, and politics. As a side note, during rehearsals, when Sam Jackson asked Tarantino what the content of the letter would be, Tarantino asked Jackson to write it himself, which is the version in the final movie. When it came to casting Daisy Domergue, Tarantino initially had his eye on Jennifer Lawrence, who at the time was at the height of her fame with The Hunger Games and her collaborations with David O. Russell. And while Tarantino was a huge fan of hers, ultimately scheduling conflicts made her unavailable to participate. As Tarantino thought about it more, he realized two things. One, that this is a movie where movie stars wouldn't work, as it needs to be an ensemble where nobody is more important than anybody else. And two, Lawrence would have been too young, as he felt the Hateful Eight carried a throwback quality that echoed Reservoir Dogs, giving the project a full circle feel. Because of that, he wanted the actors playing Daisy to come from the same generation as the other cast members, performers who had all established themselves in the early 90s, around the time he was breaking out as a filmmaker. He revisited the work of three actresses from that era who had left a strong impression on him, rewatching their films like personal mini film festivals. In the end, it was Jennifer Jason Leigh's body of work that stood out, reminding him of her intensity and range, and cementing her as the perfect choice for Daisy. At one point in the film, Kurt Russell's John Ruth snatches a guitar from Daisy and smashes it to pieces. However, this wasn't a prop. It was a genuine Martin acoustic guitar from the 1870s, on loan from the Martin Guitar Museum. The plan on set had been to swap out the valuable instrument for a replica right before the smash, but nobody ever told Russell. Leigh's horrified reaction on screen was completely real, and she even briefly broke character, looking to the crew off screen, which is why the moment then jump cuts to her looking back at Russell, breaking continuity. The crew was stunned once they realized what happened. The museum, which had been informed that the guitar was broken in an accident, was furious when it learned the destruction had been scripted, and the proper communication to Russell never happened, although Tarantino allegedly was in the corner of the room with a funny curl on his lips because he got something out of it with Leigh's performance. In the end, insurance covered the financial loss, but the guitar itself was irreplaceable. Afterward, the Martin Guitar Museum announced it would no longer loan out historical instruments to film productions, making the scene infamous not just for its brutality in the story, but for the very real damage it left behind. Speaking of music, Tarantino has admired composer Ennio Morricone for years, often including pieces of his music in his films. This, however, frustrated Morricone, who complained that Tarantino places music in his films without coherence, as he felt the songs Tarantino would choose didn't match the visual on screen. And this is because Morricone famously would write music for director Sergio Leone before shooting, so that Leone could play with it on set and seamlessly weave it into the movie. Tarantino, who prior to this had never commissioned an original score, felt the Hateful Eight demanded one, and so approached Morricone to write it. However, by the time Tarantino approached him, the movie had already been shot, and was only weeks away from completion, which was the opposite of how Morricone worked. However, Morricone, who had previously read the script, recalled an idea he had had for a theme that evoked both the relentless momentum of the stagecoach and the looming violence that defined the story. He also offered Tarantino unused material from his earlier work on John Carpenter's The Thing, a fitting connection since The Hateful Eight drew inspiration from that film's sense of paranoia and isolation. Initially, Morricone only intended to provide a theme, but once he began composing, he was inspired to create much more original music than planned. Interestingly, the film's overture wasn't even a single Morricone composition, but rather a blend of his cues stitched together by Tarantino's music editor, something Tarantino admitted he hadn't realized was possible. When Tarantino first heard the score, however, he was unsure if he liked it. He had expected something closer in style to Morricone's work for Leone, but Morricone had no intention of repeating himself. Instead, he wrote darker, more experimental experimental pieces that match the bleakness of the film rather than echoing the sweeping grandeur of classic spaghetti westerns. At first it came as a shock, but over time Tarantino grew to appreciate the score's originality and how it elevated the film. The result was not only a defining element of the Hateful Eight's atmosphere, but also a career milestone for Morricone, earning him his long-awaited Academy Award. What began as a sequel to Django evolved into a brutal chamber piece about mistrust, race, and survival, becoming more than just a Tarantino bloodbath. It was a film that tested his process, pushed him into new creative territory, and brought him into collaboration with a legendary composer, cementing its place as one of Tarantino's most daring experiments. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.